What's important to people who have chosen a clinical profession is take care of patients. Generative AI is not a human. It interacts in a human-like fashion, but it lacks context. There are lots of things you can do to accelerate the development of treatments and the evolution of healthcare without actually sacrificing the do no harm principle. We live at a point in time where I would say ambient healthcare solutions are quite real. Leading change takes a coalition. It's not just about a single person.
Welcome to Andersen YouTube channel. Today we're welcoming C-suite transformation leader, executive advisor, critical thinker and motivator storyteller who's been turning vision to action for more than 25 years. Hello Claus, I'm so glad to be speaking with you today.
Hello everyone, I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Your journey from a theoretical computer science PhD to Chief Technology Officer and Digital Transformation Officer is truly impressive. Could you share with us the key milestones and experiences that shaped this path?
I can try. It's a long story, and so you start somewhere. A long time ago, I was into technology. I got my own personal computer and decided that I was going to do computer science. That would be my career path. But there were some points in my career where you have to make choices, and I remember a couple of them, which sort of probably took me to where I'm at. The first one was when I'd been in my first job for a couple of years. I worked for Danske Bank, the largest Danish financial institution. And all of a sudden I got thrust into this whole chief architect CTO job with very little warning. And I didn't know what it was, but somebody had been to a conference and that was now my job. I think it forces you to reevaluate what's important. And one of the things I learned from that sort of time in my career was it was all about people. I actually didn't succeed at first. What happened was that I focused on the tools, the processes, the methodologies, and I forgot that there was a human component and that people also have to learn how to think differently when you're trying to drive change. So that was sort of, put me on a path to be more people-centric. Fast forward to when I moved from Denmark to the US, I started traveling the world, working with IBM clients, trying to drive meaningful business impact from technology. And you walk into a room with people you don't know. You might be working with them for a few hours, for a day, for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months. And how do you tell a story that's meaningful? How do you actually inspire people to think differently? So I had to decide at that point in time I was going to become a storyteller. So you start with people, you get into storytelling, and as my career progressed into healthcare, I started leading larger teams and decided I was going to focus my time on being a technologist turned storyteller and focus very much on the culture, the people, and the business impact. So that's a little bit of the story of how I got from where I started in Denmark through 2 countries, 3 industries, and a handful of jobs.
Claus, throughout your career, you've built and led diverse teams that innovate and achieve ambitious goals. What strategies do you use to inspire and motivate your teams, particularly in the very specific environments like healthcare and technology? How do you cultivate a culture of continuous learning and innovation?
It's a really good question, because innovation is hard. A lot of times people think of innovation as something that happens on the side. I always believed that it's part of the day job. And you have to figure out how you encourage people to think certainly outside the box, and maybe even sometimes say, what box are we even looking at in terms of what problem are we trying to solve? So you inspire people by leading the way yourself. Right? You talk in terms of the stories of what we might do. Some of the techniques I've applied is ranging from what name do you give your organization? So most people say it's the IT team or the technology team, but these days we do so much more. Right? If you say the IT team, you've set a box around what the team does. To a degree, the same thing if you say technology team, though that's larger. So the last couple of teams I've led, we've had a naming competition. And we found different things to calling ourselves. And when I was at Teladoc Health, we called the team Beacons. It's a long acronym, it stands for something, but what matters is that you can relate to that. And it's not a confining construct. It actually represents change and it matters to people. job before that, we called ourselves Digits, because it was all about digital transformation of an academic medical center. Got a little bit of a problem if you sort of say digits to a physician, because they'll say, why are you talking about fingers and toes? But to technologists, it means something, because it's zeros and ones, and you turn the business into zeros and ones. So you start with identity. You help people on a learning journey. You start working on what can you do yourself. I mean, how can you share the experiences you have had over 15, 20, 25 years? I spend a lot of my time with my own teams, just sitting down and sharing what I've learned in very interactive learning sessions. So I bring myself to the teams, because we have geographically dispersed teams these days. Those are some of the things you can do to drive that kind of culture and transformation. So I've focused on themes like, what is digital transformation? What does technical leadership mean? What does it mean to lead when you're not a manager? How do you drive innovation? What is the role of storytelling, and how can you become a better storyteller? And how do you use your network to drive change?
That's great. Do you have an IT project? Andersen will do everything to launch it as soon as possible. Strengthen your resources with our specialists. Hire a well-coordinated, dedicated team, or entrust the entire development process to us. Getting started is easy. Fill out the contact form to get a free consultation.
Digital transformation aims to make processes faster and more efficient. However, even EHRs, though improving care provision and patient safety, can sometimes lead to burnout among healthcare professionals. So what do you think are the best approaches to elevate the positive aspects of digital transformation to the maximum possible level?
This is another really good question. I think you have to engage people. I think you have to understand what people's reality is. Everybody around us are motivated by different things. I'll give you a simple example, and this is not on the provider side. It is actually on the health consumer side. But many years ago, I had the opportunity to listen in to a conversation between a health insurance member and a clinical nurse. They knew I was there, so nothing bad was happening. It was not in secret. But I had the chance to listen in to a conversation they were having, and they were having a conversation about how do I have a healthy life, and they'd had the conversation before. So it was like, how is it going? What has happened since the last time we talked? And the person who was the health consumer, he basically said, well, I'm trying and I'm doing my best, life happens. And then the clinical nurse changed the conversation to, well, what are you looking forward to? And his daughter had just gotten engaged, and he was looking forward to walking her down the aisle a couple of years from now. And she turned the conversation to say, look, let's talk about what it takes to get to that, right? Because the path you're on right now, you're not managing health very well. And that completely changed the conversation, because it wasn't what the science said. It was what was important to him. The same thing does apply on the clinical professional side, because what's important to people who have chosen a clinical profession is take care of patients. So anything you can do that makes them feel that they have more time and more space to take care of patients, that means now they're engaged. So you sit down, you work with them, you have a conversation about what works, what doesn't work, you're open, you're transparent, and you have the right dialogue about what their reality looks like, how you can make it better. And it's transparent conversation about sometimes there are just things we have to do. Look, hospitals need to get paid, so documentation needs to be provided and claims need to be made. So there are certain things that we have to do. But we still talk through, how can technology help you? There's a lot of technology out there that can remove friction. I'll give you a simple example. You can use generative AI to auto-generate the physician's note after a visit, and all of a sudden you've taken a lot of burden off the shoulder of the physician. So the problem isn't necessarily something like an electronic medical record system in and of itself. It is how you implement it in an organization and make sure that people transparently understand what it does, what it doesn't do, and why it's configured the way it is. That's a start.
So, who should be responsible for driving digital transformation in healthcare organization? Who should address concerns, requests, and propositions of end users, especially if processes need to be revamped? Should it be CIO, CTO, Chief Digital Officer, someone else to bridge this gap between a clinical and operational team?
It's a really complex question. And I don't necessarily know that in the end it will be just one person. So if you start untangling it, you do need a chief storyteller. I actually firmly believe that. You need a person that sees it as their reason for being here to tell the story what might be. It's not the story what is, it's the story what might be, what could be, what we would like to be some point in the future. The hard thing for an organization isn't actually to drive change towards what people are asking for. Right? And there's this famous Henry Ford quote out there that says, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So when you ask people today what they want, right, they want shorter wait times, they want less friction, they want better integration, they want more transparency. Those are all important. But if you think about where technology is going, there is so much more. We can make our homes intelligent. We can basically put sensors and intelligent agents into our environment. We can have them monitor where everything is happening the way it should. We can get a better life through ambient technology solutions that are just present in the environment around us. Sounds a little bit like science fiction. There are certainly elements of fusing software, hardware, and humans into the same environments. But the reality is many of those kinds of things are possible if you have someone to tell the story of what could be. The trick is to move towards where the target is going, not where it is today, right? Because change takes time. So if you start a journey today, you have to shoot for where you need to be 2 years from now and what the expectations and possibilities are at that point in time. So I think it starts with a chief storyteller. And it's important that you understand who is the singular chief storyteller that tells the story of the merge of clinical science, technology, logistics, behavioral science, and data science. That person doesn't have to be the expert in everything. But it needs to be a really good synthesizer that says, this is how all the pieces might fit. So your chief storyteller is the starting point. Then you need the people that can translate that to what does that actually mean in practice. So it's not enough to have a chief storyteller that's divorced from the execution and operational engine of the environment. So sit down and have the conversation about what is the right coalition, how do you build the right kind of partnerships, how do you create working steering committees. I'll give you an example from an EMR implementation, going back to that. Work very closely with the leader of the clinical ops team. And we basically were in a meeting every week, 30 minutes to an hour, just working through this is where we are, doing more than what steering committees normally do. We were literally choosing to personally lead the journey, the adoption, and the implementation of a new EMR platform. And the way Jennifer said it when we went live, I still remember this very vividly. She said, Claus, this was a great implementation. Nobody cried. And sometimes that's what it takes. You got to get to the point where, at point of implementation, everybody is sort of okay with the change, and then they'll learn to enjoy it over time. So the beginning of an answer is a very complex question because leading change takes a coalition. It's not just about a single person.
So if we go back to this change, healthcare professionals are very thoughtful about any change, like you say, which means changes take longer. Surely this is because of the do not harm principle. Is this reluctance to change rather a good thing or not really from your standpoint?
I think it's both, right? Because the thing about healthcare is there are some things you can't reverse. If you make a bad decision about a patient, that can have consequences that are irreversible in terms of your health. So there's a reason that from a healthcare perspective, we have protocols. There's a reason that we do clinical trials, right? Phase 1 of a clinical trial is, as you just called out, do no harm. And that is also an operating principle for every clinician I've ever met, is we're willing to try things out, but we should start with do no harm. And then after that, we look at what is the efficacy, what is the effect, of the treatment that we're trying out. So absolutely, the do not harm principle has a place. And as we're evolving new treatment paradigms, new standards of care, we should be thoughtful of the fact that at least we do no harm. With that said, there's still things we can do to accelerate even the development of new treatments. So I'll give you clinical trials as an example. The traditional way of doing clinical trials is you send out the protocol, you give it to a number of practicing physicians, and they will try to recruit patients that fit. What if you could use technology? Let's say AI-type technology to screen a larger group of patients and recruit people for the clinical trial faster? What if you could use digital twin type technologies to vet out whether this small molecule compound, which is a potential new drug, is likely to have an effect or not? So you may not even need to go to human clinical trials. So there are lots of things you can do to accelerate the development of treatments and the evolution of healthcare without actually sacrificing the do no harm principle. And the same thing goes when it comes to the operational aspect and to things like population health management. You can absolutely apply technology to drive change faster at a population level, but you have to be mindful always of clinical quality. There are so many health tech companies out there that have great ideas, but they may not have the background or the experience in terms of how do you partner with the rest of the ecosystem around you, and on a foundation of quality and thoughtfulness, drive the change and the value that technology can unlock. So that's part of what we have to figure out as we go into this future we're talking about, is what is the right partnership model. There are a lot of people that are saying we need to replace the healthcare ecosystem. I don't think you can replace it. I think we have to make it better. There are reasons that the mechanisms, the people, et cetera, are in place that we have today. And if you think about it, it's a complex, ever-evolving organism. Replacing it will take decades. So let's look at what we can do to drive positive change together instead of being hell-bent on trying to replace everything lock, stock, and barrel.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, telemedicine companies considerably increased their market value. However, user perception of these solutions has now changed. Do you think this is a sign of the lack of trust in virtual care? If so, how to reverse this positive perception of telemedicine as it remains a promising tool, alleviating workforce shortage and achieving better care for wider patient audiences?
So COVID-19 was a good example of forced disruption, forced transformation. It happened. There was nothing we could do about it. We had to move to a different operating model and on very short notice. So you have a choice that you can make. Right? You can lean into the change, which is what most of us did, or you can try to maintain status quo as much as possible. And the companies and organizations that chose to do that are struggling more today. But there's no question it was a very stressful time. It was a very stressful time. It was a very fearful time. At the same point in time, it was also a very hopeful point in time because we had all these opportunities to drive meaningful change on a time frame that we couldn't have imagined. Right? We made more change, most of it positive, in 2 years, and that we would normally do in a decade or two. But possibly we didn't necessarily take enough time to think through what we had a conversation about a couple of minutes ago. How do we actually make sure we integrate the notion of virtual care as a natural part of the overall healthcare ecosystem? I don't personally think it's a question of in-person care or virtual care. It's a question of sometimes one is better than the other, and sometimes it comes down to personal choice. The key question is, how do we make them work together? So if you apply the right clinical integration practices, if you apply clinical quality, if you give people choice, there are absolutely areas where I would argue that virtual care is superior. Let's talk about mental health. Many of the people that have mental health challenges have a hard time getting out of their sort of known and safe environment. So forcing people to go to a physical location, to have a consultation with their psychologist, for example, is not a good thing. Right? It's actually counterproductive in many cases because it means that people may not even show up. Right? So mental health is an area where for many health consumers, for many patients, for many of us, there's actually an advantage in doing virtual care. In some cases, virtual care gets a bad reputation because it's episodic and, hey, I have a virtual visit and it's not integrated with anything. That's exactly what we have to fix. If you take a whole person longitudinal approach to virtual care, it can and will be a natural part of the overall health ecosystem. And that's how you make sure that people just think about it as care. 10 years from now, I don't think we're going to be talking about how I get my care, virtual or physical. I think we're going to be focusing on who I get it from. My care team, my healthcare institution. That's what I'm going to be associating with. And it will just be natural to get care in different ways, be that physical, virtual, some kind of hybrid.
Today, patient centricity is a popular concept. What is this for you, and how does it work in large health institutions where care processes are very industrialized and patients associate themselves with mere IDs in the system?
So patient centricity is a mindset. It really comes down to how you think about problems. And historically, there's been a scarcity of clinical resources. Be that physical space, be it clinicians. The scarcity of the physical resources is what has driven a focus on optimizing for how you use the resources on the provider side. But we've learned conclusively over the last couple of decades that actually we can optimize the provider side of the equation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we optimize the outcome. So engaging the patients the right way, engaging the families and friends and caregivers around them is going to be the defining characteristic of how effective we can be in things like lifestyle change, population level improvements, and even if you have a more serious disease, let's take cancer as an example. I worked for an academic medical center, Memorial Sloan Kettering, for a couple of years. And one of the things that's obvious when you walk the hallways of that kind of institution is how the patient engages in their own care, how they take care of themselves, how they follow instructions, how they live their lives, and how happy they are, actually impacts quite significantly the clinical outcome of treatment. So patient centricity shouldn't be an or compared to looking at the most effective way of providing care. It's an and. Because patient centricity helps you deliver better outcomes. Yes, there's a balance in terms of how we use the clinical resources in the buildings, et cetera, but it has to be a balance. And patient centricity starts with just trying to understand where they're at. My example of the clinical nurse that had a conversation with the middle-aged man that wanted to watch his daughter walk down the aisle. It's all about being human. It's about understanding who we are as humans, not just the clinical science behind our physical bodies.
As tech providers, should we care about patient centricity when developing digital tools as much as healthcare providers do, along with patient safety, cybersecurity, effectiveness, and efficiency?
Yeah, absolutely, yes, no question. We have to not just look at the engineering aspect of solutions, and we have to not just think about requirements. We have to look for the great experience. There are principles from design thinking, for example, that we should absolutely adopt. And I've been driving that as a parameter for the teams I've had the privilege of leading. So if you think about design thinking, it's always about the who. Try to understand the person you're trying to help. It's about the what, which is what is the problem you're trying to solve and what might a solution look like. But it's also about the wow. The wow is the emotion you're left with in terms of, wow, this was a great experience. So if you remember all those three things, the who, the what, and the wow, I think we're on a better path. And in many cases, we have the opportunity to throw a little bit of pixie dust into an experience. There are many examples. So how you design the elegance of a user interface matters. How you create little bright moments in hospital environments matters. If you take the new outpatient building that Memorial Sloan Kettering built right before the pandemic, there was a digital koi pond in the foyer. And why? Because if you have children in the hospital and they're waiting, and sometimes they end up waiting for a while, having a digital koi pond to play with is a meaningful way of contributing to a better experience. So if we start thinking through the experiential aspects of what it means to be in clinical space, in virtual space, or off on your own because you're managing things like a chronic condition, we'll come to a better place. And I do believe that technology teams, can and must participate in that.
So is there an ideal way to create a new clinical digital product from idea to market release? How can providers ensure that innovative solutions are designed and implemented with end users as their primary focus?
I don't know whether you can necessarily ensure it as a forcing function. Right? I think you can decide that that is something you're going to focus on. I mean, every time you build a new product, be that a clinical product or something else, what you should do is what we just talked about, which is remember the end consumer that you're ultimately trying to help. But is it a forcing function? I don't think so. I think it's a mindset. And I think it's a mindset that starts from the humanity that we've been talking about throughout our conversation, a humanity that starts with just understanding each other, understanding the environment that we're all in, and aligning on what it is we're trying to accomplish in terms of an outcome. That then becomes the foundation for a joint understanding of what needs to happen and a conversation about the best way to get there. So that's not necessarily a particularly profound way of looking at the problem, but in some ways I think we just have to start with being human.
Do you envision RPM revolutionizing critical care with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and how do you see tech companies contributing in this area?
I do, but not necessarily just by looking at the pieces. I think what's unique is that we live at a point in time where I would say ambient healthcare solutions are quite real. Right? So what is an ambient healthcare solution? It's a solution that's invisibly present in your environment. It's benevolent and it helps you stay healthy. Whether that is your home setting that helps you make sure you've got healthy food in your refrigerator because you've got sensors there, whether it's a sensor that senses whether you sleep well and provides suggestions if you don't, whether it is physical movement monitoring that will help prevent falls or help detect cognitive decline so that you can help, whether it is a continuous glucose monitoring device that helps you manage diabetes. There are so many things we can do where we put smart devices, AI algorithms, sensors into the environment around us, and that then becomes part of our care team. But where I started was, I don't think it's the pieces in isolation. I think it's how we built meaningful, valuable ambient solutions. That's going to be the big revolution. And sometimes when I see conversations in the press, etc., I cringe a little bit because it's all focused on the technology. Technology is a means to an end. The ambient healthcare solution is what helps you get and stay healthy. So that's what we should pursue.
Collins Dictionary recognized artificial intelligence as the word of the year 2023. It is well known that GenAI can produce highly customized personal messages. In your opinion, can GenAI considerably contribute to more human-like relationships between patients and medical providers, as well as to patient centricity? Is there any probability that eventually clinical communication will be outsourced to AI?
I think we're going to have to go very far into the future, maybe never, right? In a scenario where human conversation get replaced by AI. Now, for some things, you're going to see a replacement factor, especially in the learning and guidance space, right? Because you just don't have enough access to clinical experts in current state to get answers for all the questions that you would like to have answered, especially if it's 2 a.m. in the morning. But there are also human components to interaction that I don't think you can emulate. So AI is not new. We have had machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms for more than a decade. Some would even argue two. Many of us have built AI-type solutions that we put into production. They do everything from helping us plan better in terms of capacity planning. So, if you're a virtual care provider that's national, how do you know how many providers you're going to need in Kentucky next Sunday? Well, there's a machine learning algorithm for that. But what generative AI gives us is a new class of AI technology. So earlier generations of AI technologies helped you predict things. They helped you understand the likelihood that something was going to happen. They gave you insight in terms of complex dynamic systems. What generative AI does is it helps us consume and understand large amounts of data in a human-centric fashion. Whether that is speech, could be text, could be audio, video. There are many aspects of what you can generate. But generative AI type models have the ability to ingest vast amounts of information that is human-centric in language and then allow you to interact with it in a language-centric fashion. I do think that's a game changer in terms of solving certain processor problems. But I would say it's going to help us in processing information as an augment to humans. It's going to help us learn in a very personalized fashion. I don't see a time anytime soon where certainly I would want to be treated by an AI physician. And I'll give you a simple example of why. Because smart as these generative AI algorithms are, in some ways they're also pretty dumb. So there was an experiment done by some people I know. They were asking, ChatGPT a couple of months ago, just giving it some symptoms and trying to figure out, could it actually diagnose appropriately? Now, you give them symptoms in a prompt, the diagnosis looks reasonable. So far, so good. The next question that they ask in the next prompt is, how do you know that? And ChatGPT replies, because I have a PhD and 13 years of experience. All right, so they got clever, and they continued, I don't think so, you're a machine. ChatGPT replies, yeah, I was just kidding. Double oops. And then they say, why would you do that as the next prompt? And ChatGPT replies, because that's what people do. Think about that. If that had been a real scenario, we would be in deep trouble, because that is not the experience we want to have for someone that needs to trust the healthcare ecosystem to be their partner in crime and keep them healthy. So I give you that example simply to say, it's amazing that you can get a pretty good diagnosis, and then it deteriorates from there because generative AI is not a human. It interacts in a human-like fashion, but it lacks context, and things like what I just described can and will happen unless we have a human in the loop. So in healthcare, at least, I think it's going to be a partnership between AI algorithms and humans, not a replacement.
What technology trends do you predict will define further development of patient centricity over the next few years?
I think we talked about the most important one. The whole notion of ambient healthcare solutions, I think, is going to be a really big impact on patient centricity. So that's one. The other one is an amalgam of different technologies that help us remove friction for the healthcare practitioners. Whether that is automated scribing, whether it is nurse sitting that allows nurses to be present in a patient room without having to run 100 yards down the hall, whether that is decision support in a clinical setting, whether that is helping specialists stay up to date with the latest research. So there are so many things we can do to remove friction, and on the provider side, help people have more focus and spend more time with the patient. So all of these things coming together in the right way is where I expect to see the kind of improvement that you just asked about. But if I had to pick one thing, and only one thing, I picked the notion of ambient solutions.
With your experience of more than 25 years, what advice would you give emerging healthcare technology leaders who aspire to drive meaningful change and innovation in their organizations?
That is a really good question. It is one I think we don't spend enough time talking about. I often have people asking me, how do I become successful in my career? And I don't know whether that's the best question to ask. I think two better questions are, what is important to you in a job? And the answer is not getting the next promotion. That's not actually what's important to you in a job, and what keeps you happy, right, on a day-to-day basis. Every job has aspects we like and aspects we don't like. That's just the nature of the professional world we live in. But being really clear on what's important to you in a job, whether that's the people you work with, whether it's the real-world impact you have, whether it's learning new things, whatever it is to you, because it's different from person to person. Be very clear on what's important to you in a job. And the other question I think you should ask yourself is, what are you uniquely good at? I actually spent some time thinking about that. I think it must have been a decade ago. After a executive coach who was an ex-radio producer of all things, she was a phenomenal woman, I'm still in touch with her, asked me, what is your value proposition? And I said, my value proposition, and I said it with conviction, is I turn vision into action. And she said, no. That is your slogan. It's a great slogan, Claus. But it's not your value proposition. I just looked at her, what do you mean? No, that is my value proposition. No, that's the effect you have. That is what you do. It isn't actually a nascent value proposition. What makes you special? If you were to give me in a sentence, or even better in a word, the description of what makes you uniquely valuable in a work environment, what would that be? It took me 6 months. And I got some help from people that know me quite well. And because I took it seriously, this was actually, it was a meaningful question to me. And what I came up with is, my word is synthesizer. And it goes with the whole notion that I'm a technologist turned storyteller. So what I think I'm really good at is understanding a lot of moving parts and synthesizing the story of what could be if we put them together the right way. So I'm the master synthesizer. And so going through those two exercises, asking yourself what's important to you, but also what's the unique value you bring to the environment, in my case, in the intersection between technology, business, and people, not just in technology, that will help you navigate a career path that is A, satisfying to you personally, which is really important, but also B, lets you focus on what makes you unique, so you can contribute in ways that only you can, rather than just being another person on the team. A little bit abstract, but that's probably the best advice I can give anyone.
Thank you, Claus, for such an amazing and insightful talk. We really enjoyed it. Hope to see you soon during our major health tech events.
Thank you very much. My absolute pleasure.
Today we were honored to have Claus Torp Jensen, C-suite transformation leader and motivating digital transformation officer. Subscribe for more insightful talks. See you soon on Andersen R&D.